Hey, it's Zoe. Good to see you again this week. My question for you is, have we gone too far with corporate paternalism? Shouldn't people just pull their socks up and get on with it? Or are we just coddling people too much? Let's find out. On Planet Human, cyberserve. What does that mean? It means that Uber has hired a robot, a robot food delivery system in Jersey City. Now, this is a city that is sometimes hampered with bad weather, with snow, and they are starting to deliver food using a robot. So the robots are coming for us. When will they be arriving on our doorstep? Well, it seems in Jersey City, they are on your doorstep. Stay tuned for how robots are going to make our lives easier. So they say. We'll see. On Planet Zoe, I am packing food for my Australian Alpine walking track. I did a whole bunch of cooking. I took it to my friend's place who has a freeze dryer, and I've freeze dried a whole bunch of stuff. And now I'm putting together all the other bits and pieces, like my oat breakfast materials and my nut snack pack. So there's actually a lot of food that you need to plan for when you're hiking long distances. You got to make sure you have enough calories on board, which means you're carrying a lot of food. Anyway, I'm busy packing right now, getting ready for the big trip, which happens in a couple of weeks. Elsewhere on Planet Zoe, also started writing Olympus Dawn. I almost forgot the name of my new book. Olympus Dawn. It's the 5th book in the Gaia Enterprises series, and it's the finale of the main story for these key players, and we're going to be on Mars. So yeah, I'm started that. I would like to get the draft finished in a few weeks after my walk. We'll see how we go with that. In the meantime, I'm still in production mode with Power Games, my next nonfiction book, scheduled for release in May. Make sure you sign up for the Kickstarter campaign advance notice. The link is in your player right there. You can just click on that and sign up. You'll get advance notice and insider behind the scenes secrets and the first notification of when it goes live. So you can be quick in to get the very rare and very privileged access to limited passes to some of the workshops, as well as some of the other really fun bonuses that are coming along with the book, including workbooks, an audiobook, and a ton of tip sheets and worksheets, as well as exclusive live events. Okay, that's enough about Power Games. You can sign up for that. Link is in the show notes, or go to my website, zoerouth.com, click on books, and Power Games is there. Put your name in, and Bob's your uncle. What if we made decision-making transparent? How might that change the power dynamics in a workplace? If I've learned anything working with councils and with executive boards and executive teams, is that decision-making is anything but transparent. It's anything but explicit also. So last week I talked about how to make decision-making process explicit and open. What about making it transparent? When we share why we're making a decision and also how we made the decision, then this is like a recalibrator of people's stress. They tend to not worry so much about it. And it also makes assumptions die in a dirty ditch because when people know why and how you're making decisions, they can't make assumptions. Well, tea time. It's tea time in the office kitchen. And my guest today is David Dilger. He is an HR legal specialist. He's been in the HR legal game for a long time, and he is a speaker on the circuit. He's also worked with lots of different big organizations, helping them troubleshoot their HR legal stuff, including Cotton On Group, Costa Group, and Tassel. So he's based in Tasmania, and he has a lot to say about how organizations need to take more responsibility and how individuals need to take more responsibility and how we can create a better workplace together. Without further ado, here's David. All the way from Hobart, Tasmania. Welcome to the show, David Dilger.
G'day, Zoe. How you going?
I'm pretty well. Thanks for asking. And it's good to be well because there's lots of things that could be unwell when it comes to leadership in the workplace. And when you're talking to a lawyer, you're possibly in for a bad day if you're a leader at work. What are some of the issues that leaders are confronting right now from a legal point of view?
I think what's basically happening, and the trends from Fair Work are certainly indicating this, that years ago that what we'd have a dispute in the workplace, and you'd engage a lawyer, there'd be some type of negotiation, and the parties would sail off into their respective sunsets with a small pile of cash, and everyone would be happy. But one of the things we're really noticing right now is people are going, I've got a problem, I want it dealt with, and I'm staying. So we're seeing a lot more of disputes where there's no end game in terms of people are going to go off to their respective positions. That employee comes back into your workplace and is saying, I'm here, deal with me. And that can be particularly challenging, particularly if you're in a small business with a small workplace and you're hoping that that problem will just go away. The overwhelming trends are they're not. And so we're seeing lots more claims, and the typical claims we're seeing, starting with workers' compensation, is obviously an ongoing one. Adverse action can be for termination or non-termination, and that's what I'm talking about with those disputes. The general protections claims, they occur while someone's still employed. The discrimination type ones, we're seeing the work health and safety ones, and that's particularly around that psychosocial risk. Breach of contract claims tend to be rarer these days because that tends to be someone who's moving on. Unfair dismissals, clearly, whilst that tends to be the one that gets most of the headlines, that's not really the practical reality of where the disputes tend to be trending in terms of fair work. We see some privacy claims, and then your ongoing claims, particularly around bullying, sexual harassment, sex-based harassment, hostile work environments. They're really all about someone wanting to stop something, but I want to stay and I want my issue to be dealt with.
That's really interesting. Interesting in that in the past, it's like, I don't like what's going on here. I'm going to sue them, get some money, and carry on somewhere else. People wanting to stay, but have matters addressed, have things be improved, is quite another thing altogether. And just zooming out a little bit, thinking about all the things that you're listing there, do you think there is a greater expectation on workplaces to be more paternalistic in terms of being nurturing and safety conscious towards their staff? Is it a paternalism thing that we're seeing, or is it just workers standing up for their rights more?
I think it's a paternalism thing. When you get regulation now, so I think up until recently, probably if you had a look at the work health and safety legislation, you would say, this is just all about dealing with physical hazards. Now, it's very much the refocusing. The legislation didn't change, but people's focus has been changed with things like the new regulations and new codes of practice dealing with psychosocial health. So that has been the change. And I think with that change, people have had a greater awareness on what they are actually entitled to do and what the expectation is. And I think there's also been a genuine understanding that the old way just didn't work. And if you're really after high performance, you have to look after those psychosocial issues, because when you achieve it, there is a higher level of performance that flows from that. And when you look at the stats, Safe Work Australia put out 2 in 5 have experienced a mental health condition. It generally costs you, it's enormous. Nearly half of those are really anxiety or stress disorders. When you look at compensation, my general rule is this: it costs you 3 times as much and it takes you 4 times as long to deal with it. So just looking at those stats alone, you're going, that's an issue that really needs a different way of thinking to address it, because it's just so significantly different to dealing with a broken leg or some type of other issue. And the numbers also tell us why this is serious. They increased for the period 20 to 24, that was an increase of nearly 20% from the stats they took in 2021-22. But here's the kicker. It's 97% increase to what we were dealing with 10 years ago. So that is the emphasis on where people are going. That's a big problem. You got to deal with that.
So that's 97% increase in claims around mental health, in particular anxiety and stress, is crazy over 10 years. Now, are people more stressed, or are they just reporting it more is the question. What do you think the answer is?
Look, I think some of the work that is done by Jonathan Haidt in the anxious generation, he sort of, quite clearly and diligently sets out that there is a mental health epidemic. He really probably squarely places the blame on the over insistence on technology, particularly people's phones, social media, all of those things. So I don't have any doubt that people are more stressed. And when you think about it, I was listening to Arthur C. Brooks, who's a well-known social scientist and has written some great books like Strength to Strength, and in the middle of writing a new book. And he said, the problem you've got is people just can't deal with the type of information and the volume of information we're now dealing with. It is that proverbial drinking out of a fire hose. We've never had the amount of information focused at us in that short period of time. And what he said is that the left hemisphere is task focused. You're right, sort of in the bigger picture. And when you're on your phone or dealing with information on social media, it's just all that left brain stuff. And so you never really ever get a break. And so our forefathers had plenty of time. They didn't have all of this information. They got plenty of down regulation. But when people are always on, that becomes the problem. So I think that's what's actually going on.
That is fascinating. So I hadn't really thought about that angle before, but of course it makes sense. Of course, technology is changing the way that we work, and we're not looking after our brains so well as a result. And there's been lots of great literature around that. Coming to what leaders can do, because they're swimming in the same fire hose trajectory. So obviously looking after our own brains and being mindful of how we're using technology and all that, and putting some good boundaries in place is an essential piece for leaders. Coming to the psychosocial hazards piece, because I know that makes a lot of CEOs nervous. Like, what does that actually mean? Can we unpack that a little bit in terms of what leaders need to be mindful of and what they can do to manage those?
So the first thing leaders really need to do is get a handle on the typical psychosocial hazards. Okay, so they're set out in the codes of practice, and there's some variety ones. If you're in the harmonised states, you've got the list in that code of practice. But what we're seeing, so we're talking about high in job, low demands, low job control, poor support, lack of role clarity, poor organisational change management, inadequate reward and recognition, poor organisational justice, trauma exposure, remote work, violence and aggression, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, that type of thing, conflict or poor workplace interactions. Then, in addition to that, we're looking at new ones coming in. So we've seen Safe Work Australia, the regulator in this, is talking about a new code of practice just on fatigue. And I think if you're talking about fatigue, yes, there'll be a new code of practice on that. And look, if you have a look at things, World Health Organization just recently named burnout as a syndrome. And I think that is clearly based on that. When you have a look at a lot of the high profile sort of departures these days, when someone says, I'm spending more time, I'm going to leave my job to spend more time with my family, or I need a break, I'm going, that is just another word for burnout. And I think that's what a lot of people are facing. And then just to sort of tie this in, when I look at other sort of areas or regulators, such as Comcare, which deals with the Commonwealth jurisdiction, They also have psychosocial hazards such as intrusive surveillance and job insecurity. And then even if you look in Western Australia, which is sort of stands out by itself, that has poor leadership or practices, lack of policies, adverse environmental conditions, family and domestic violence, and trauma, first-hand or vicarious. So that's the list on which you're trying to deal with, right? It's enormous.
Can I just check in on that? One of them, the last ones, one of the last ones you just mentioned, family and domestic violence as one of the contributing factors. Leaders don't necessarily have control over that. That's what people's personal lives coming to the workplace. Is that what they intended to be mindful of?
Yeah. And if you have a look at the regulation in this area, so with family and domestic violence, we've now got particular legislation. It's a protected attribute for things like seeking a flexible work environment and stuff like that. You've got particular focus around making sure that people's pay slips don't sort of identify that they are accessing family and domestic violence type leave. So the workplace has really stepped in that area because, again, that has become such a significant contributor to people's mental health. And if you think about this during COVID, I mean, one of the crazy but unfortunate stats that they actually showed was domestic violence went up during COVID. That's because people weren't at home, were at home more. And that's why you had lots of those sort of issues around people going, I need to come into the workplace, and employers going, but you can't, you need to work from home. And they're going, no, you don't understand. And then I think all of those issues have particularly made it a workplace issue. So I get the general reluctance to get involved in people's personal lives, but the law, the intersection in the law is now sort of saying you might need to, because what people bring to work is your responsibility, because it can have an effect on others at work or those who are dealing with them. And kind of the way the law has focused it, there is more of that legal responsibility on employers.
David, I'm curious what you're thinking about what we're seeing coming out of the US right now, which with President Trump eliminating DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and the other one of basically mandating everybody back into the office. There's no more work from home. Do you think those trends will also appear in Australia?
Yeah, let's deal with the DEI one first.
Okay.
I think you can summarise this. There's probably three types of cultures in dealing with this. If you go back historically, there was honour culture. And honour culture basically said, Zoe, if you say something bad against my family, you and I'll have to have a duel, and one of us will leave this earth. And a lot of the tribal cultures are built around honour culture, that you grab mild indiscretions and you seek to eliminate them. Then we moved on to what's called dignity culture. And dignity culture, I could probably best summarise by saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That is, we trust individuals to deal with stuff. You choose whether you're upset about something or not, and you try and work it all out. Then we've got what's probably where people bemoaning these sort of DEI type initiatives. So we've moved too much into victim culture. And victim culture says the individual shouldn't be protecting itself. The system should protect victims at all costs. We shouldn't focus on individual needs. We need to blunt instrument this sort of approach. And I think what has happened, the push towards that victim culture where people can be offended for other people who aren't offended, people have pushed back onto that. And I think the dignity culture is the piece where we want to get to. That's probably what I would consider to be the happier medium, because you know, you had all sort of, I would say, probably extremist type statements in victim culture, which is all victims must be believed. And I don't think that's actually strikes the appropriate fairness from a legal or the pub test. That is, all victims definitely should be heard, but believing them as of a right without testing that, I think that's kind of dangerous. And I think that's why the pushback has occurred. I think the DEI initiatives are good, provided they are couched in dignity culture, not in victim culture. And that's why I think you get that pushback.
That's a really interesting observation and insight. I hadn't heard of it that way, dignity versus victim culture. Yeah, interesting. Like DEI espouses to change systems like systemic racism and systemic sexism, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it comes with its downsides. I like that you picked up on the fact that this sort of pearl clutching, being offended on everybody else's behalf when other people are like, whatever, I think is quite interesting. And it does make us walk on eggshells. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to behave because we're afraid of offending. So that's an interesting dynamic. So do you think that we are on trend following the US with regards to this? Like, do you think there is pushback around the DEI stuff happening in Australia? Will we go so far as to people abandoning their initiatives?
No, I don't think so. I think we're so much more over-regulated in Australia that the law just wouldn't allow you to do what's occurring in the US. I mean, you got to remember we have big systems around things like all of those causes of action. In the US, you've got really what's called employment at will. And that is, I just sack you, and there's no such things as notice and unfair dismissal and things like that. So, you know, I would say our regulations are so much more significantly entrenched that you would be unable to wind back what you are seeing in the US. Do you want me to deal with the COVID issue as well, to come back to that one?
The work from home stuff. Yeah, absolutely want to pick that one up. So let's have a crack at that one.
So I think this has both an economic point of view on we need cities to thrive again. So I can understand why regulators are sort of saying, I want people back to the workplace. But I think there's a real issue on a productivity versus visibility issue. I think the main reason where people go, I need you back at the workplace, Zoe, generally is a visibility issue, not a productivity issue. Because if it was a productivity issue, I'd be able to tell you why you're not being effective working from home. And I can understand in some of our bigger cities where people are saying, I'm unproductive because I travel an hour and a half to work and then from work, and I have life and all of this, and I just can't fit it all within the day. And I think what businesses have failed to properly do is set out what it is that I need you to do, right? So in the PD position description, I need to tell you what you're meant to achieve. Then the managers need to manage you according to that. But the reality is I've seen it time and time again where employees just turn up to work early and leave late, but they're on their phones, they're looking at the internet, they're doing all these other things. And so it's not really a productivity issue. So that's where I think the real trend has to come. And we're seeing it, that lots of workplaces are going with these hybrid models. You must be in the workplace for 2 days. I don't personally like it. I think it's horses for courses. That is, what is it for your particular job that you need to be there? So Zoe may need to be there 4 or 5 days a week, and David may only need to be there 1. But again, applying the blunt instrument, I think COVID demonstrated that a lot of the jobs people said couldn't work from home were proven wrong. You absolutely could do it from home. But I think the biggest issue out of all of it is we've got a visibility issue, not a productivity issue. And when managers properly manage their people, they'll know what you can and can't do. And it probably shouldn't matter whether you work from home or from your workplace, unless there is that group collaboration which is needed. I mean, you and I are working quite well, not needing to be face-to-face. In my job, I'm doing Fair Work hearings, conciliations, all over Teams. Now, if you would have asked David Dilger 10 years ago, could you ever do that over the phone? I would have gone, no, you need to be there. But we got better. We got better at Zooms. We got better at Teams. It just saves all of that unnecessary travel where you don't need to. There's some occasions where I agree, face-to-face just can't be beaten, but that's not all occasions. And that's where I think that trend will go. And Australian workplaces will be kind of very similar to other workplaces. I think that's more likely to be following the US and European trends.
Okay. So we can thank our regulation and our common sense, maybe. Dare not actually use that phrase because it's what Trump has used recently for all sorts of things. So workplace flexibility still is one of the hallmarks of Canadian, maybe Canadian working, but certainly Australian working.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit. One of the things you sent through to me as a preamble was talking about conflict-free communication, and my eyebrows shot up and went, conflict-free communication, is it possible? Because I know a lot of leaders struggle with dealing with conflict in the workplace, either with them and their team members or their board members or their team members amongst each other. So how do we achieve, or can we achieve, conflict-free communication?
You can't, and it's not a bad thing, right?
Okay.
Because not all conflict is bad. Conflict, if it's handled well, is more of an opportunity. It leads to growth. It leads to stronger teams. And I love Brené Brown's message of clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And that dovetails into what Kim Scott in her book Radical Candor talks about. And radical candor is you're caring personally but challenging directly. And sometimes that little bit of uncomfortableness or that conflict is absolutely necessary for trust. It's necessary to get performance. And where we're on the other side, if we're going to be conflict avoided, you're going to end up with what Kim Scott calls ruinous empathy. That is, I just don't deal with it. I hope it'll go away. Or I'm overly nice and I've just positive without actually going, but here's the problem. You might be manipulative insincerity, and that is I'm just all focused on the personality and making sure I look good and actually saying the right words, even gaslighting you. And then you get into the other part where people are going, oh, David, so you're telling me I've got to take on the issue head on. And that leads to obnoxious aggression. That is, you don't really care about the person. And this is where I'm saying to leaders, challenge, hard on the issue, soft on the person, challenge the behaviours, support the individual. And that is, I can identify things which are actually going wrong, but I've got to work out what's the measure that I can tell you these issues without you basically having a stress response, an unhealthy stress response rather, because biologically, when your amygdala, and that's your stress determinant, when your amygdala is triggered, it's going off of there's risk. It's going to shut down your EQ, your memory, your immune system, because your amygdala gives you an opportunity to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They're the only responses you give. So that's why we need to have those conversations which are empathetic to the individual so that we can actually deal with it where your frontal cortex actually operates and we get some rational debate. That's what we need to work through. The others of themselves will lead to conflict eventually blowing up. So what I see most of the times from a legal case, it's not like what you see in the news where someone just goes really rogue and aggressive. Most of the problems I see is avoidance behavior, which is left unchecked for too long.
Yep. And that turns into undermining, gaslighting, and all sorts of horror shows. I like that you picked this up. I was having a conversation yesterday with the leader who's very task oriented, and she's very forthright, frank, and would just prefers direct communication. And she just doesn't get why others are different to that. And what I said to her, it's for those of us who are more team oriented or relationship oriented, we can find that kind of directness quite challenging and affronting even. So she's like, what am I supposed to do? Not speak up about stuff? I'm like, of course you need to speak up about things. And as you said, it's more about that empathetic care for the person and being direct on the issue. So in terms of basic strategies that I helped her with, which is what you're suggesting too, is like, just connect with the human, first of all, ask them how they are, show empathy for who they are as a human, say, let's talk about the behavior that's problematic. And I've always espoused this idea of speaking the truth, but not taking a piece of truth like it's a poo bomb and going blat. It's all about connection and then delivery. So that thank you for sharing that. That's really quite helpful. Now, David, are you ready for the Fast 3?
I am.
Very good. Sir, what is the future technology you most want right now?
I would love AI to be able to write more things like from me. I know it can summarize stuff, I know, but it summarizes it like it's AI. So I dealt with and still deal with to this day, Dragon voice recognition. Yeah. Dragon just got comparatively better and better and better the more I threw into it. And that's what I'm saying with AI. I'd love for it to be as good now as I want it to be, where it really personalizes my communication.
You can train it to do that, though. If you haven't experimented that much with it, if you've got sample writing, you can upload it and say, analyze my style, and then write a paragraph on X topic in my voice, and you can give it feedback and finesse it. Have you tried that?
I have. That's what I'm saying. I'm just impatient with it. I just want that to be better now. So all the work I put in with Dragon, where it learned and it had years and still does, I'm just wanting all of that to happen really, really quickly.
Got it. All right. Number 2, what's the best tip you ever got for leadership?
I love Simon Sinek's, if you don't understand people, you don't understand business. I think that is it. Like, when people all the time go, oh, David, you don't understand, I'm going, go back to the people. Understand yourself first, understand your audience. Once you understand that, the issues are really, really clear.
Okay, awesome. And number 3, what are you reading or listening to right now?
I'm a bit of a sort of, I read multiple things all at once. I don't just follow a book. So I'm reading The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. I'm also reading The Chairman's Lounge by Joe Aston. I listen to Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson, the Performance Intelligence podcast by Andrew May, and I love The Imperfects by Hugh and Josh van Kuylenberg and Ryan Shelton. So I just throw all of that around, and I tend just to pick books and stuff without reading one, and I just flip between them, just depending on my mood.
Interesting. And what's The Imperfects about? I haven't heard that one before.
Look, The Imperfects is a great little podcast. It's basically about getting people on, and it started off with a lot of what I would call high-profile people, just talking about their challenges, going, you know what, we all have our struggles. You look at the picture perfect celebrity, and you go, they wouldn't have any problems. And people coming on being vulnerable and saying, you know what, I struggle with X, Y, and Z, and this is how I made my way through these mental health problems. And fantastic. Hugh von Collenberg did the resilience project for kids in school, and he talks about gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. But it's sort of it's a real human sort of feel-good type podcast. And yeah, I love it. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. That was the Fast 3 with Zoe's extension questions.
Right.
David, is there anything that I haven't asked or that you would like to share before we sign off?
I think, look, if people often say, get back to your process, and I go, no. Look, the like the real estate rule of position. Lots of lawyers will tell you process. I go, no, people, principles, process last. If you can do that, you'll straighten yourself up. You'll deal with issues more effectively than rigidly applying policies and stuff. Because, you know, I've seen the template letters. I mean, imagine if you're a person and you get a letter that says, hey, Zoe, come to a meeting with me, bring a support person, and this may include disciplinary action up to and including termination of your employment. Now,
awesome.
When people do that, they're just going, are we really trying to sort out the problem, or am I just a slave to a process template letter? So that'd be the one I'd say. If people could focus on that, that'll give them better outcomes.
Awesome. David, where can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
I'm at Edge Legal, so we're a boutique employment and safety practice. We only act for employers. My business partner and I started that out many years ago when we said we wanted to advise the managers we'd be happy for our kids to work with. So that's kind of what we do. Where I'm on LinkedIn, I'm regularly publishing articles there. I do speaking gigs, we do training, and look us up on our website.
Fantastic. And what is the website address?
All the W's, edgelegal.com.au.
Okay, edgelegal.com.au. David, thank you so much. This was enlightening. I loved our conversation. It's nice to see a lawyer who's people first. Love it.
Thanks, Zoe. Pleasure.
On Read to Lead this week, The Intelligence Trap by David Robson. Subtitle is Why Smart People Do Stupid Things and How to Make Wiser Decisions. So we're all on a decision-making bent at the moment. And I love this book from a few years ago. And the interview I did with David is also there. We'll put a link in the show notes so you can have a listen to that. It was enlightening when I read this book about how our own brains and expertise can derail us. So sometimes we can be too smart for our own good. It's also one of the leading traps that can lead us to going from an elder, a wise and compassionate leader, into a tyrant, which we would like to avoid. So that is The Intelligence Trap by David Robson. That's it for the show this week. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit like, subscribe in the app, subscribe and become a podcast insider. The link is in the show notes, where you get tip sheets. You get what did you know factoids that you can share with others to look really smart. You get great discussion questions so you can lead conversations with your team members to help take the conversations even further. So it's a way of making use of your listening time, whether it's in the car, at the gym, or on your dog walking spree, and turn it into something useful and practical to make your career and your leadership game much better. So that's becoming a podcast insider. I love your feedback. Send me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com, or send me a message on any of the socials. It makes it more of a conversation and is very fulfilling for me to hear from you. So yeah, bit of karma there. If you send me some good karma, I'd be so much appreciative of that. Next week on the show, we have Scott Marshall, and he is coming from us from Semester at Sea, which is an amazing program where college students and continuing educational adults, such as moi, might go and spend a semester, that's 3 months, on a ship going from port to port, learning on board as well as learning experientially off board on the countries that they visit. So it's a real cultural immersion exercise. Can you imagine spending 3 months on the ship, going to these different countries and learning experientially about the topic of your choice. Fabulous. So that is Scott Marshall. He's coming up next week on the show. Don't forget to sign up for the advance notice of Power Games. The link is in your show notes, or you can go to zoerouth.com, click on books, and Power Games is right there. You'll get the insider scoop of when the book is going live on Kickstarter. Be the first to get access to the book and all of its exclusive bonuses, as well as exclusive opportunities. So that is Power Games, the book. Live with grace, lead in service, live well, lead well. See you next week.